Welcome to another episode of Ton's Two Cents podcast. Today's episode is titled Avoiding Common Pitfalls in Government Contracting. We'll explore various common pitfalls that small businesses and, well, practically any business can encounter in the government contracting sector, and we will provide strategies to avoiding them. I'm your host, Ton Wilson, and with us here today is Constance Jackson, a seasoned government evaluator with over 20 years of experience in the GovCon industry. She will share her insights on how small businesses can navigate the complexities of government contracts successfully. Constance, thanks so much for joining us here today and say hello to our listeners, the intellectuals, and tell them a little bit about yourself.
Hello, Tom. Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. My name is Constance Jackson. I am currently an acquisition SME, and what that means is I assist the federal government with releasing RFPs and awarding government contracts. In my past life, I was a proposal manager and a contracts manager, so that is considered the full acquisition life cycle, knowing how things work on the industry side as well as the government side.
Exactly. And so you and I kind of share similar backgrounds, except I don't have the government side, which is always kind of interesting because we have some spirited debates sometimes and conversations. For those of you who follow both myself and Constance, we're both part of the American Small Business Coalition and a number of other, industry related type of associations out there. So intellectuals, you are in for a treat here today in this conversation because while Constance and I do agree a lot on things, we do see things from different perspectives and are not, what is it? We're not shy to express them, which is great.
That is great. Yes. Different perspectives. Very good.
Absolutely. So, Constance, before we get into like our main topic of discussion here today, I'm always interested in hearing about people's journeys and really what inspired them to become, to kind of enter into the government sector. And you, in particular, government evaluator, and the intellectual listeners here are really going to be interested in hearing that because we're always wanting to know who are the evaluators, what are they like, and things like that. And so this episode is going to be so exciting because we're going to get into like that whole like backstory mindset. But most professionals don't wake up one morning or graduate from high school or leave college and say, "Hey, I'm going to go into government contracting." Was that like for you, or like how did you get into this field?
Like you said, and like most people, I fell into the field. I started working for the state of Virginia for child support enforcement. And a couple of years after I was working for them, Lockheed Martin won a state government contract to provide child support enforcement services. And this was back in the 90s. So I worked for Lockheed Martin. Some things came up that were a conflict in terms of what we were supposed to be doing contractually. So I decided to read the entire contract, knowing really nothing about government contracts, knowing more about child support enforcement than government contracts. But I read the contract, I became intrigued, and I just started taking coursework in acquisition, procurement, proposals, and contract management. And 200 plus classes later, here we are.
Holy cow! Yeah, I think that's where you and I diverge. Is the thought of sitting through a class just I just can't. I know I should, and I have. So intellectuals out there, I am educated. I just don't have this, still have the patience for it.
Yeah, I mean, and things constantly change. So I'm always in a class. I'm actually
Yeah.
in a class right now. I'm in an acquisition class as we speak because things are always changing policy, procedure, laws, and that sort of thing. So I'm always in a course somewhere.
Yeah. Of course you are. So I wouldn't expect anything different. Um, so, well, then you're the perfect person for me to ask this question. So let's get right into our first segment here, which is understanding the rules for government contracting. And I always like to start with a good foundation, starting with the basics. And because not understanding the rules of government contracting can be a major pitfall. And so our topic today is GovCon pitfalls. There are so many pitfalls in government contracting, and not knowing the rules is definitely one of them. So, can you provide some things that small businesses and GovCons in particular, um, what they must be aware of to avoid some of these common mistakes?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is um, your corporate contract and government contracts are completely different. The laws that govern corporate contracts are completely different. There's federal acquisition regulations, and those are the regulations that govern government contracts, as well as whatever the particular agency that you're supporting. They have their own policies, they have their own supplements that govern their particular contracts. Um, and so that is the first thing I would say. You know, companies have been doing business, corporate business, they assume that they can jump into government contracts and it's the same, and it's not the same. One of the things, you know, there's a clause in government contracts that they can terminate the contract for convenience. You will not see that in a corporate contract, but termination for convenience is, it appears in every single government contract, and that is definitely something you have to keep in mind. The government's intent is not to terminate contracts. If they give you a 5-year contract, they believe that the services or the products will be required for 5 years, but sometimes things change, they lose funding, all sorts of things happen that can impact whether they are going to move forward for the entire 5-year period. And that's something that you have to keep in mind as you're doing your projections for the future as a small business and as a large business.
Right. So, some of these, like, where would someone go to review them? And every agency is kind of different. Um, there's the FARs, there's DFARs, the FAA has their own. It is really kind of complicated to maneuver that. So you're right. You really do need to know based on the agency, what regulation does it fall under? And so you brought up a really good point about the public. I'm sorry, the private commercial industry coming into federal contracting into the public sector here. Um, what are some of like the most common pitfalls or like some of the most common misunderstandings that you've seen from the commercial side that they just besides the regulations that they just don't understand?
Invoicing is the because one of the things that I do is I support the Corps' post contract award, helping them review invoicing and also making sure that whoever has the contract, the contractor is carrying out whatever they're supposed to be doing in terms of products and services. A lot of times, even though there are instructions in every single contract award, small businesses do not understand the process. And if you send in, you know, a lot of these agencies use portals and it's all automated. If you send in a contract and you don't send in an invoice and you don't follow the rules, your invoice will continue to get rejected. And that can add, you know, you have to start the process all over again, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Small businesses cannot afford to go when you typically these days can get paid within 15 to 20 days of submitting a proper invoice. A small business cannot afford to go 30, 60, 90 days without being able to pay their creditors and without being able to pay their employees. The government frowns upon any agency, any contractor, large or small, that does not pay their employees on time.
Yeah. No, that is one of the big difference. It's been so long since I've worked in the commercial side. I just, April is it, right? And to me, it seems such an easier to feel to work in because it's so much more regimented, it's so much more prescribed
Right.
than in the commercial side.
Yeah.
But there are certain things that there are some nuanced differences and hoops that you kind of have to go through on the government side.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I ask any small business to do is go to your contracting officer and ask if you can submit a test invoice. You don't want to wait until it's time for
That's
you
a
to
good idea.
invoice. Yeah, for you to invoice, to send your invoice in and run the possibility of your invoice being rejected. That is something that most COs are going to allow you to do because they want small businesses. They want to be able to pay you on time. It's never their intent to do you any harm, but there are situations that come up where small businesses do get harmed just because they don't know the rules.
Yeah. So there are some rules too. I think the one biggest misconception is that I can't talk to the government. I can't ask them questions. And things like that. So there are very specific rules, timeline wise and things when it is, and it's really actually very encouraged for you to talk to the government. But knowing the right stage of where in the procurement cycle that it's in, as to whether or not you can talk to the government.
Yeah, and there's a big push here recently from the time I originally entered the GovCon world. Everybody was like, oh no, we can't talk. But when industry and government talk, there's a better chance that the government is going to get what they need. They need that back and forth with industry so they can present what the requirements are. Sometimes the contractor helps them shape those requirements. So that conversation or conversations prior to release of an RFP, that's very, very, very important.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it should be part of your business development and capture strategy too, is to have that dialogue, is to really kind of understand the customer instead of coming in and bidding blindly, on things, which 9 times out of 10, that's kind of how they are bidding. They are kind of bidding blindly on things. So I think that's kind of one of the pros of working in GovCon is that you do have that allowance and that encouragement to have the back and forth
Yeah.
type of discussion so that when you do bid, you can bid with confidence and you can bid with a good understanding of what the customer needs. So,
Yeah, and there's also a
um,
push towards issuing statements of objectives these days versus
mm,
statements of work or PWSs. And so, if you have to write a performance work statement and turn that into the government, you need to have that dialogue with them prior to, so you can understand exactly what it is you're going to be held accountable for and what it is they're looking for.
yeah. So you brought it up. I didn't. You brought up the statement of objectives or a SU. Vice's a statement of work, which is a SAL, which is different from a performance work statement, which is a PWS. So since you went there and we're building the foundation and the basics for this so that there's no misunderstanding, what are the differences between I'm putting you on the spot here because it wasn't part of my original like, hey, I gotta ask Constance this, but is a very common problem and they use them, industry and people in general use them interchangeably, but they're all a little different. So can you give like a very brief description of what they are and how they're different that government contractors should know?
Absolutely. So your statement of work or your SOW, that is for the government is telling you what they want you to do. They are down in the weeds and they're telling you exactly what it is that you need to do. And you will probably see that more with contracts that are firm fixed price that are not complex, not as complex with the statement of work. The performance work statement, that is your performance, some type of service. They want they want some flexibility there, and they also want to be able to measure what it is in the work that you're doing. So they would issue a performance work statement. With a statement of objectives, that is where the government may not know everything that they actually need, and they really are depending on the contractor to come back with a performance work statement. They're also going to do a quality assurance plan so they can monitor you. But this is something where they will give you a set of objectives and they're looking for you to meet them with the performance work statement. So the government would issue a statement of objectives with the RFP, and then you would, as a contractor, submit a performance work statement that you've actually drafted based on what the government is looking for with the objectives.
Oh my God, that was fantastic. So intellectuals, that was like probably the best explanation of those three documents that I have ever heard because it wasn't overly complicated. It doesn't have to be overly complicated, but in our industry, in particular, words matter, y'all. It really, really matters. And when you say certain things, that's the true sign that when I hear people using terms incorrectly or using, like I hear this a lot, like they'll say proposal instead of like, solicitation, or like vice versa. I'm like, those are two very different things.
Yes.
Yes, they're related, but they're two very different things. You can always kind of cue in on when you hear certain things like that, whether or not they're knowledgeable in what they have to say, or experienced and knowledgeable in what it is that they do. And so that was fantastic. And I think our intellectuals are definitely going to benefit from hearing that, because those terms are used interchangeably very loosely in this industry, and a lot of times incorrectly. So thank you, Constance, for that.